Hello, welcome back to the channel. It is Dan, Nocturne Knives. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. I'm coming at you with another full review of this knife right here. This is the Boos Blades Smoke TM2. I'll start this off with some measurements and size comparisons. The overall length is coming in at just over 8 inches, maybe 8 1/8 inches. Blade length is coming in right about 3.5 inches. Maybe just slightly longer, 3.6, something like that. And cutting edge is coming in at just under 3.5 inches. Maybe 3.35, 3.4, something like that. Handle thickness, looking at a little bit on the thick side, just barely 0.48. Blade stock thickness, looking at 0.14. 145 thousandths or so. Thickness behind the edge is a fairly reasonable 20 thousandths. That's not so bad. And then tallness closed, it's coming in at 0.86. So very svelte, just over 3/4 of an inch. In weight, we're looking at 2.8 ounces. That is in grams, 80 grams. So definitely a long, sleek knife here. Do some size comparisons, get the two classics out. You got the Spyderco Para 3 and PM2. It's coming in much closer to the PM2 size, but handle length is actually a little bit closer to the Para 3. Thickness wise, it's coming in just a little bit thicker than the PM2. But the thinness wise, this is where it really shines. You can see how narrow it is. It's coming in totally within the profile of the PM2 handle. Here it is up next to its little brother, the Mini Smoke, which is probably my favorite small knife. Here is another ball bearing flipper. This is a front flipper, but close enough, Protec Malibu. Here's another longer, thinner EDC knife, the TRM Atom, and another Chinese-made front flipper on bearings. This is the SBD Mini Tempest. Now with measurements and size comparisons out of the way, I will get into the review. I'll start it off with likes and then go to a super like, talk about neutrals, things I don't really care about that much, don't like them, don't hate them, talk about dislikes, and then some super dislikes. So my first like is going to be the whole plus front flipper. I love that combo. It kind of annoys me when knives only have a front flipper because that's kind of a harder method to use. It requires more motor skills and it's really hard if your hand is, say, wet, slippery, cold, anything like that. So also having a hole, or in this case a slot, cut out, whatever you want to call it, to do the middle finger flick is, I think, borderline necessary on front flippers. So I really like that about it. Next like is going to be this pivot. It's kind of a small thing, but I love the way the pivot looks. The cutouts there, the shape of it, the finishing, really love this pivot. It's interesting. And then on this side, it's just a standard T8. I appreciate that, but the show side pivot, really like it. Next like is going to be on this handle. It has a lot of micro milling, and I love some nice micro milling. You can see those subtle lines on this top relief cut, and in here it looks really nice. It feels good. They're smooth, they're not catchy or grabby at all. So I love all the micro milling touches on this. My next like are the finishes. I love the finishes on this knife. Blade has a really nice, consistent, smooth stonewash. I love the stonewash finish. On the handle, it's also got a really nice stonewash. Again, love the stonewash finish. Ano and then light stonewash on top of that. My next like is going to be how this thing carries. So in pocket, it's absolutely amazing, except for one small issue. It's really thin. It's very light, coming in at only 2.8 ounces for 3.5 inches or so of blade. Amazing weight to size ratio. Carries really well. It's so narrow. It's super easy to slip your hand past it. Very smooth back here. So if this can share the pocket easily. I like to have my wallet and knife in the same pocket, and it works really well with this knife. My next like is going to be the lock bar disengagement and the closing in general. So I really like the access you get on this lock bar. You can see on both sides there's a really nice relief. Very easy to put your thumb in there, push the lock bar over, and then you just turn it and it falls down, give it a little shake, and it's closed. And when it goes to fall down, it doesn't usually, at least if you position your thumb well, this nub on the blade will fall down onto your thumb and you won't end up getting caught by the edge. So it's really easy to unlock it, have that nub hit your thumb, get all your fingers out of the way, and shake it closed. Oh, and this is running on skiff bearings, which I think improve the action to a reasonable degree. I would recommend skiffs on this. And my last like is the logo. The Boos Blades logo is just awesome. Such a cool logo. Really love that. Now my super like is going to be the Boos aesthetic generally. So I absolutely stole the super like from my review of the Mini Smoke, but it still applies here. I love the Boos Blades design aesthetic. All of his knives have an incredible look to them. The fast, sleek design seems like they're moving when they're standing still. I think it looks amazing. I love that all of Boos' designs. Now my neutrals. First is the clip. So the clip on this, I don't love it, but I also don't hate it. It has pretty good clearance here, gets over most pants. I think you'd struggle to find pants that were too thick for this clip, but it also sits kind of high in the pocket. So you can see you're gonna have about that much sticking out of your pocket. I think it'd be cooler if it was pushed back all the way up here, maybe a semi-deep carry of some kind. So I don't hate it, but I also don't love the clip. I do like the way it looks, but the carry is just a little bit too high, I think. And this is kind of a sleek, discreet knife. Seems like the point, a little weird to have this much of it sticking out of your pocket. And then my next neutral is the ergos. This knife is very slim and sleek, which makes it carry really well and look kind of cool and unique, but that does kind of hurt the ergos just a little bit. They're really not bad at all. You have a spot for your index finger here. These two fingers sit here. Last finger goes on kind of the shelf right here. So they're not bad, but there's so little to grab onto that there's too little for the ergos to be amazing. It's too thin and narrow for there to be amazing ergos. Again, pinch grip, it's pretty good. Saber grip, hammer grip, none of it's bad. You get a little bit of action off the clip. It sticks up just a little bit, but so the ergos are kind of a neutral for me. My last neutral is going to be the frame lock on this. Again, not something that I dislike, but I don't love it either. I think this would be more compelling, a little more interesting as a liner lock, or perhaps a bolster lock. So frame locks are fine. I don't have a problem with frame locks. Great lock on most knives, but on a thinner knife like this, and especially something with a front flipper, it can be easy to get your fingers onto this lock bar. If you're trying to do something like this reach around, which I actually can't do on this knife. I'm not sure if it's because of the detent strength or the lock bar being there, because I definitely do end up riding on the lock bar here. You can see if this was a liner lock, I think it would be easier to do something like that. A little easier for the middle finger flick, because when you go to do this, your middle finger, it catches the slot, but it also presses on the lock bar somewhat. So you can kind of lock it down a little bit, and you can usually still get it out with your middle finger, but sometimes it just puts a lot of pressure on your nail. So here's an example of a bolster lock on a front flipper, and I think this makes it not a little bit nicer to use, because you can't really get onto this lock. Your fingers are going to be sitting here onto the bolster part and not putting any pressure on the lock bar. Again, a neutral, it's not a deal breaker for me. I just think that is a potential improvement, but I don't hate the frame lock as it is. Now, dislikes. I do have a few dislikes. So the first is going to be the detent. It's not a bad detent, but it could be a lot better. It's got a decent pressure, decent strength, but it's not very snappy. It's kind of a mushy detent. It's a kind of a, yeah, I think the best way to describe it is it's just a little mushy. It's not snappy or clicky like a lot of knives. For example, take this Sharp by Design Mini Tempest. I'll get it right up near the mic. You can hear that kind of click when it disengages, and in the action you can really feel the sharpness of the detent. And it's not a heavy detent, it's still light, but it's just a much sharper and cleaner release. And now I know this is kind of an unfair comparison because this is an $800 knife, but hear that, you can get that clickiness out of this detent, whereas this detent, it's much more mushy, a lot softer. It's still a stiff detent, but it's just not a crisp disengagement of the detent. So I'd love to see a sharper detent on this knife, and I think that's kind of a Bestech issue. I think they just do slightly mushier detents in general. Rayot seems to do much sharper detents. Oh, and this is OEM'd by Bestech. I don't remember if I mentioned that. My next dislike is going to be this backspacer design. I don't hate the way it looks. It's a good backspacer. It functions well. It protects you from catching the tip nicely. But see those metal rings in there? Those are actually loose. So you take this screw out and each of those rings falls off of the backspacer. So it just makes it a real hassle to take apart and put back together, because you have to get those rings lined up just right and on the screw. And there are 4 of the rings, and you have the backspacer and there's the clip. So there are just so many parts to this when you're trying to put it back together. I really don't appreciate that design with these loose rings. I much prefer it on the mini smoke. Those aren't separate rings, those are actually integrated into the backspacer. So it's just a single piece backspacer and the screws thread straight into it. I think that's a much better design. It makes disassembly and reassembly far easier. My next dislike, and probably my biggest dislike, is going to be the thickness. So both the handle thickness, which just feels a little bit excessive. I think it'd be nicer if it was much closer to the thickness of this mini. I think it'd be a lot more compelling that way. And then also the blade thickness, so both in stock thickness and thickness of the grind. I think it would be far more compelling as a much thinner grind and a much thinner blade, like this mini is. So the thickness behind the edge on this is like 15 thousandths. It's really thin, really slicey, but on this full size one, they went much thicker, up around 20 thousandths. And I think it hurts this knife, and the stock thickness being 140 thousandths feels unnecessary to me. This isn't a hard use knife. It's not a super robust or overbuilt knife. It doesn't need to have stock that's this thick. It could be much thinner. An 1/8 inch would be perfect. Take this to like a 12 to 15 thousandth behind the edge grind and be far more compelling. It'd be way slicier. As it is, it's pretty decent going through boxes and stuff like that, but it's not amazing. And then my next dislike is going to be the sharpening choil. You can see how it's just too small. I have sharpened this once, currently wearing a mirror edge freehand, and you can see how it's just hitting that choil because you don't have enough clearance between this plunge grind and where the edge starts. So there either needs to be more space between the start of the edge and the plunge grind, just push the plunge grind back that way, or make this notch deeper. On the bright side, you could easily expand the sharpening choil. It doesn't need to come around and interface with the stop pin or anything like that. So this would be a very easy fix. It's something I offer and have done on a lot of knives, but it could pretty easily be improved. For instance, you take a look at the mini and you can see it's much better in that area. The plunge grind is much farther away from the start of the edge, much easier to get in there while you're sharpening. Another dislike I have is this knife did come to me with a little bit of lock rock. It was kind of weird lock rock. I think the cause was the lock bar didn't travel over enough, so it would just kind of click clack back and forth a little bit. And I emailed Will and Leo Boos about this, and they did get back to me. They told me they would take care of it if I sent it in. I did actually take it apart and add a little bit more lock tension myself, and that fixed the issue right up, but they were totally happy to take care of the issue for me. I'm sure they would have done a great job on that if I'd given them the chance, but I ended up fixing it myself. So that might have been a super dislike, but since they were so open, they just told no real questions asked. They were like, here's the address, send it back, we'll take care of it. That's just going to be kind of a dislike for me, is that it came with some lock rock, but again, fixed it and they were happy to take care of it. So not a huge deal. And my last dislike is going to be the view through this cutout. I think it's just a little bit strange. Like, you're kind of seeing through this cutout into parts of the knife that shouldn't really be seen. I'm stealing that opinion from Nick Shabazz's video on this knife, but I totally agree with it. It's just kind of some weird parts of the knife you're seeing into, because here you're seeing a cutout, and where the lock bar starts, you're seeing just kind of some weird stuff through this cutout. Whereas you take a look at the Mini, and you look through the cutout, and it's totally clean in there. All you're seeing is the cutout for the lock bar, which I don't mind. Much cleaner than this, where you're seeing kind of that weird stuff. I think this would be better without the cutout, or just eliminate this weight relief pocket inside there. Hopefully you can see that well enough so it doesn't look as weird through the cutout. Change it in some way so you're not seeing kind of these forbidden internals. Forbidden internals sounds like a terrible metal band name. I'll trademark that, no one steal that. That's mine. Those are my dislikes. I don't have any super dislikes for this knife. Nothing that really jumps out as me as sinful or just so terrible. Really, no problem. No huge problems with this. Just those few dislikes I mentioned. Potential places for improvement, but no super dislikes. And those are my thoughts on the Boos Blades Smoke TM2. Overall, I do really like this knife. I've had a few Boos knives over the years. I definitely will be getting more. I want one of his custom arrow front flippers. Those look incredibly nice. And I just really like everything that Boos makes. His designs really speak to me, the fast sleekness. I love it, definitely very into it. And this knife I do like a lot. I've had it for a while now. I've carried it a lot, and it's a great knife. It's fun to play with, very nice to carry. I can definitely recommend it if you want something in that sleek, light, kind of longer category. It does have some issues. It's a little bit on the thick side in the blade, in the grind, in the handle. It carries just a little bit high in pocket, and disassembly is real fiddly with the backspacer configuration, but none of those are deal breakers for me. The blade is ground well enough and thin stock enough to cut just fine. It'll go through cardboard and things like that with no big issues. So I think overall I definitely recommend this knife. I like it. Go down below, drop a comment, let me know what you think about this. Do you like Boos designs? I feel like they're a bit underrated. Like, where do you sit on that? I would love to hear a comment about that. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button if you like this kind of content. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.